If you watched my previous video I made about the current state of the Final Fantasy X HD remaster, you might recall that I very briefly touched upon the soundtrack.
There is also the arranged soundtrack, which, unpopular opinion, I actually love.
Very briefly, translating into about 18-ish seconds of that video. And you know what? I kind of picked a bad example to showcase the differences in each soundtrack. Low-key, may as well have played the same song. The previous video was more of a discussion about how visually different the games were to each other anyway. So think of this video as a free DLC update, especially because I really didn't expect anyone to watch that original video. Thank you very much. So allow me to talk about the differences with HD soundtrack and the original soundtrack on PS2. If you're joining me for the first time or you don't remember anything about the video, I mean, it was a year ago. Let's do a quick rundown on how the HD remaster exactly came to form. So the original Final Fantasy X started development in 1999, it was released in 2001, it had critical reception, blah blah blah, a million lives were changed, blah blah blah. But now it's regarded the best in the series. Source? Ask literally anyone. Now, one issue is that Final Fantasy X was stuck on the PS2. There's many different reasons involved. By the time we reached the next generation of consoles, this game wasn't accessible. So Final Fantasy X's core team decided to bring the game to the HD consoles, updating it both visually and auditorily. This is where Final Fantasy X HD Remaster was born. Now this was back in the day. Games didn't have ports, games didn't have remasters, and they definitely didn't have remakes. So it was a very novel and exciting thing. When it was finally released, it was met positively. That's not to say it didn't have its own set of flaws, because as we know, it definitely did. Now when it comes to Final Fantasy X on the PS2, the game, similar to other Square titles at the time, used the PlayStation 2's Sound Processing Unit, or SPU. This was basically a sound card for the PS2, and allowed up to 48 channels of audio. Now that is double the amount when compared to its older brother, the PS1. If we're thinking of a track in terms of channels, try imagining each channel as a different instrument, because in the long run it just kinda is that. Let's look at Dezanagon for example. Now I'm sure you whomst has clicked this video is aware this is a piano piece, so it uses one channel to emulate the piano sound. Compare that to the battle theme, which uses about 13 channels for its composition. So basically, the composer jumps onto a digital audio workstation, smashes some keys down in a MIDI keyboard or whatever, and then that data gets burnt onto the disc and it plays through the PlayStation 2 using Square's custom sound font. Definitely over-explained that. This is so much more space efficient compared to using high quality recordings of every single track. And back in the year 2000, your game had to fit on a 4.7 gigabyte DVD. Unless you were happy with your game spanning over multiple discs. For the HD remaster, this was no longer an issue. I mean, PS3 discs alone, they can hold 25 gigabytes at the least. So this version of the game uses re-recorded tracks and the power of looping to play its OST. Now, while most of these tracks haven't changed too much compared to the original versions, using this looping method is a much more storage intensive, albeit less time-consuming way of playing your soundtrack throughout your game. The PS2 did use recordings as well, tracks like Tsutiki, Dane, and there's also the ending theme as well. Like these tracks are very clearly streamed, but they were very few and far in between. Now the two main differences regarding the HD remaster are the graphical updates and its updated soundtrack. On the composition side of things, only 2 of the original composers returned. Now, Nobuo Uematsu didn't return as composer this time, but simply as supervisor. When asked by Polygon about the HD soundtrack, musical director Keiji Kawamori stated, "When it comes to remastering the Final Fantasy X soundtrack, I felt the only way to achieve the quality that the fans would be satisfied with was to have the original team members work on it." And I do kind of feel like he is right when he says this. What made the original so great is the magic that all the composers injected into all the tracks that they made. They know exactly what they wanted you to feel with each track that they made. And without that, you encounter a similar issue that plagued the visual side of HD, another set of hands. In that case, it would have been Virtuos, who didn't work on the original game, and they didn't therefore have that deep connection that the original staff may have had. If we look at the track list for HD, which yes, for legal reasons I do own, there's a grand total of 104 tracks. 10 of these tracks are from 10.2. Now, the fandom page does indeed claim that the tracks featured are not in the original format, featured in the original version of the game. Instead, they remade like the tracks in Final Fantasy X HD. Now, this is false. The tracks are identical to that used in the game. In fact, I did check using my copy of 10.2, which I do legally own, and would you believe it, it's the same track. Oh my god, they're not the same, are they? So I assumed this was just a lie. Some poor sodden fandom getting confused, thinking that, oh, the Final Fantasy X soundtrack was redone. 10.2's must have been redone as well. But the HD remaster does in fact use different tracks to the PS2 game. Tracks that I'm assuming are from the Final Fantasy X-2 official soundtrack. I found it most apparent during the intro at this part. Also, I don't know if anyone else caught that, but HD's music actually doesn't line up with the intro anymore. Unplayable. It's quite noticeable throughout the whole soundtrack. Have a listen. Like I said, it is subtle. I forget that the PS2 actually uses its sound chip to play its music. Even though yes, I did just talk about it, and I do think it's great that Square actually took the time to replace these out with the album versions. Actually, you know what? Let's talk more about 10.2's music. Did you know that Square released a single of 10.2 as well? This is official, as it was made by the same composers of 10.2, Noriko Matsuda and Takahito Oguchi. It was called Kuon, Memories of Wave and Light, music from Final Fantasy X-2. Catchy title. This single consisted of 3 tracks from the game. Oh my god, is that Hollow Bastion? So there's Kuon, Memories of Wave and Light, which is the track that plays in the intro. Besaid, 10.2's version from the vault, recorded at Macalania Woods, and Yuna's Ballad. If you compare these tracks, you can hear the difference. The score to Final Fantasy X-2 is so great, and I think that the OST to the game often gets overlooked, especially compared to its big brother. This was the first game in the series that Nobuo Uematsu didn't return to help compose, and because of that, I do feel a lot of critics treated the OST as something almost inferior compared to the other games in the series. In actuality, by using music that was so unorthodox to the Final Fantasy series at the time, it really does emphasize that this is a world post Final Fantasy X, a world that is past the suffering and grief that plagued Spira. Okay, I'll stop talking about the soundtrack now, let's get back to HD. Taking away our 10-10-2 tracks leaves us with 94 tracks. 3 of these tracks, titled Omake 1, Omake 2, and Omake 3, I'm also going to take out. Omake, when translated from Japanese, means bonus or extra, so these are essentially bonus tracks. They go unused in the game. I guess you could say it was a little treat for those a part of Final Fantasy X Nation, like myself. That leaves us with 91 tracks. Hold on a second, there's more. There is also the first track,
全部話しておきたいんだ。
as well as track 90.
思い出してください。
So Titus's opening line, Yuna's closing line, I'm taking it out. Okay, so that leaves us with 89 tracks. Anything else? Anything else? Okay, so there's another 2 tracks that I can't really include in this list as well. They weren't created just for the remaster. These come from separate projects altogether. So you have Via Purifico, our first track, comes from 2002's Piano Collection's Final Fantasy X. And while it is a very beautiful rendition of the track, very different from the original. It kind of does beg the question as to why more versions of the Piano Collection tracks weren't used, like Tizanakand, or like why any of the tracks from the 10-2 rearrangement collection weren't used. Come on, they're literally right there. Then there's the other track, Beyond the Darkness, which comes from a 2007 Thank You album created by Masashi Hamauzu. This album, Villain Dank, has some ugly ass cover, let's be honest here. This album cover screams 2007 shovelware. It looks like the kind of album you'd pop into Poundland and buy for your nan as a very, very late Christmas gift. The music that's on here definitely makes up for the cover, I'll say that. It's rearrangements of tracks that he's worked on. So there's Saga Frontier 2 or Sega Frontiers 2, as I said in my original draft, Dirge Cerberus, and of course, Final Fantasy X. I guess he must have liked his arrangements so much that he decided to add it to the game. Okay, I think that's it. Thanks, me. So after months of going back and forth between the 2 different soundtracks, I've come to this conclusion. Out of our remaining 87 tracks, 64 of those tracks are brand new. The other 23, they've remained untouched. Now, referring back to our trusty Polygon interview, the actual article states that most tracks have had fairly conservative changes made to them, with most of them getting, quote-unquote, cleaned up a bit for the updated game release. However, Nobuo Uematsu then goes on to say, if we're remastering the soundtrack, we might as well change it dramatically than conservatively, right? But then this is followed by Final Fantasy X soundtrack arranger, Suto Munarita, saying when talking about Battle, I wanted to arrange the song to have a grander sound while maintaining the mood of the original at the same time. Brass and string instruments were already important elements of the original song, so we decided to expand into a full orchestral piece by adding other instruments as well. That's a lot of conflicting statements, and they're all in the same article as well. However, I did use this information to further split the soundtrack into 3 separate categories. So we have rearranged. These are the tracks that sound like they've been recomposed from the ground up. Then there's upgraded. These are our tracks that have had a simple facelift, i.e. taking out the old PS2 sound font and replacing that with a more realistic sounding one instead. And then there's the tracks that were untouched, which I guess is kind of self-explanatory. When divided up like this, we get a much more interesting result. A whopping 36 tracks in our rearranged section, but only 23 in the upgraded section. And that leaves untouched with 28 tracks. Now, a few of these tracks were already quote-unquote high quality. The vocal tracks like Tsutsuki Dane, and the many iterations of the hymn. For example, if we take out these tracks, as well as the ending theme, which is very clearly real instruments, leaves our untouched section with 12 tracks instead of 28. With the remainder of the untouched tracks, I really don't know why some of these were left out. If they did really want to go to the next generation of gaming, and in turn its soundtracks, and you have tracks like Normal Battle or Tizanakand being redone from scratch, why were tracks like Bravely Forward left out? Or Lulu's theme? Or even the trials. That track is so annoying. Intentionally annoying, I'm sure it is, but it does play for a good majority of the game. I know for a fact you all got stuck in the Colossal trials. Don't even lie about it. No, I'm not saying the PS2 soundtrack was absolute ass, blah blah blah, needs to be redone from bottom up as a first priority thing. Quite the opposite, actually. And Masashi Hamauzu even says in the same article, the original Final Fantasy X was already a complete experience, so there was no reason to alter the soundtrack dramatically. But it does seem odd that the team wanted to update the soundtrack, but also leave some pretty hard hitters out. Let's take a moment to talk about the tracks in the rearranged group. This is the part of the video where I'm going to be a little bit more opinionated. Now, I don't claim to be any expert in music. The last time I studied it was in school, and that was a decade ago. So my music knowledge is very limited. If you want a more professional analysis on these songs, I'm definitely the wrong person. Saying that, some of these tracks are far superior to the original versions, and really do highlight the limitations that the PS2 was working with. Take Prelude, for example. Now, this track has been in every single Final Fantasy game to date, but the difference with this remix is that it's almost meant to sound like a remix you'd get in a club. I remember this arrangement was the result of being inspired by the visualization of the game's scenes. A radio DJ appears right after the first scene where this song is played. I was confused as to who exactly this radio DJ was, but they must be referring to Xanar, who talks over the game whilst Tidus runs to the Blitzball Stadium. I've ran through this scene so many times whilst capturing footage that I genuinely forgot who this man was, and I spent a good 10 minutes of my life picturing a scene where Tidus interacts with any type of DJ. Look, Xanar only appears once, and even worse, doesn't even have a name in the Japanese version of the game. So it's not my fault I forgot a Z-list celebrity from a world that doesn't even exist. Now back to the quote. The original version does capture this, sure, but the HD version succeeds a lot more in doing so. Gone are the harp plugs in the main theme, replaced now with a more synth-sounding instrument. There's a lot more reverb and, truthfully, it just sounds a lot more realized and a lot more complete. The original Besaid is excellent, and it really does a good job of highlighting the calm, serene vibe of the village. For the first time I heard the HD version of Besaid, I literally got chills. And the addition of the violin? Give the track its flowers on the double, people. Even with Tidus' theme, which already does sound great, the addition of a real guitar really knocks it out the park. It makes the piece as a whole sound a lot more sheltered. This feeling of someone who didn't move out of their hometown. A feeling that does go oh so well with Tidus as a character. The choice to get rid of the harmonica and keep the guitar for the majority of the piece also helps it stay a lot more consistent than the original. This is kinda it though. The more successful tracks, in my opinion, took their PS2 counterparts and used them almost like a blueprint, not necessarily copying it frame by frame, a la, can I copy your homework? But can I copy your homework and make it stronger? That's not a great analogy. So in turn, the tracks that fail for me personally are the ones that try to replicate the original in a much more faithful way. After sinking many hours into Battle and its theme, I've come to terms that I honestly prefer the original version of the Battle theme. The HD version of the Battle theme is grand, and I will give it that. But is it too grand? Brass and string instruments were already important elements of the original song, so we decided to expand into a full orchestral piece by adding other instruments as well. This is the main track you hear throughout the game, with pretty much 90% of enemies you encounter. By hour 30 of fighting enemies and making your way through the calm lands, hearing those trumpets go ba 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 for the 600th time can get a little bit grating. In a way that the original track just never made me feel. It's orchestrated just for the sake of being orchestrated and not because it needed it. And it's the same with the victory jingle. They both also sound a little bit muddy when compared to the original counterparts. Let's also talk about Final Battle. This track plays during the final battle. I know, big surprise. This track is intense. It changes time signature constantly and really does a good job of keeping you hanging on by a thread. HD utilizes its own arrangement of this track, opting for something that tries to replicate the original feeling. But kind of falls short. One of the main issues I notice is that the piece feels a lot more softer. Now this is an issue that I notice a lot of people say when they don't particularly like a remastered track. Oh, it sounds softer. Oh, it's lacking percussion. Some tracks just don't need the heavy percussion that the original may have had. There, I said it. Movement in Green is a great example of this. A lot of people online have said that the overall track is a lot more softer, ruining the atmosphere that the original once had. But what this track does differently, it introduces an accompaniment that adds a new flavor to the track. Nobuo Uematsu recognized that the track didn't need to have the main theme as pronounced as it once was. And while the first run of the theme could be argued as quote-unquote too quiet, the second run definitely makes up for this with the new instrumentation. Now what does Movement in Green do that the final battle doesn't? It doesn't introduce any sort of new melody, and that in turn ties into my original point about how the less favourable HD tracks bring absolutely nothing new to the table. This is meant to be the final battle track. After this, the main story is done. When I listen to HD soundtrack outside of the game, truthfully, I sometimes just skip this track. For lack of better words, it's just kind of boring. However, this never happened with the original track. And I wonder if it's down to the fact that this track is much more stable sounding. It's kinda in a way lost the edge that made the original so heart-pounding. So has the HD soundtrack become the main and definitive way of listening to the Final Fantasy X HD soundtrack? No. In 2019, Square made the decision to finally upload all of the Final Fantasy respective soundtracks onto streaming services, like Apple Music and Green Apple Music. Just in time for your road trip to LA for E3, well I guess not anymore, Square Enix has suddenly made the soundtracks to every main Final Fantasy game available for free to listen to online. So no 10-2. But yes to 13-2, I don't know. Okay, a little bit of a side tangent here. I accidentally stumbled across a Reddit post that does shed some light onto why 10-2's OST isn't on streaming. According to user RCL, Square don't actually own the publishing rights to the 10-2 OST. A company called Avex do. I looked this up and it seems legit. So once again, another thing in my life is ruined thanks to legal issues. Cheers for that. So which version of the soundtrack do you think got uploaded? That's right guys, it's the PS2 version. I'm still confused by this. Like I said, the HD soundtrack isn't the biggest disgusting stain on the series that others may make you believe. And it's also not due to a, oh my god, it'd be just so confusing, because others have managed. Like for example when Sega uploaded both versions of the Super Monkey Ball Banana Mania soundtrack. I'm mentioning this solely to show off that they've put the old models for the old version of the soundtrack. That's so cool. Sorry. Anyway, I mean Square has also done this themselves with the different version of the Final Fantasy I'm so used to saying Final Fantasy X, the Final Fantasy VII soundtrack. I'd also like to quickly add that Square probably themselves don't see HD as the definitive version of their soundtrack, as every single version post the original PS3/PS Vita dual release has had the option to choose between the original or the rearranged soundtrack. I, for the longest time, thought this was added due to the criticism that the HD soundtrack received when released. Going off the Polygon interview, it seems like they wanted to add the feature from the get-go, but they just couldn't get it to work in time. Then in 2021, Square dropped this beautiful picture disc of the album on vinyl as a 20th year anniversary surprise. I'm the proud owner of this vinyl, and I'm glad I did, because looking at those Discog prices now, wowee, oh my god. But I assumed this would be the HD soundtrack, seeing as there's the HD exclusive render of Tidus and Yuna on the D side. You can tell it's the HD remaster because he's wild. Oh, once again, it's the PS2 soundtrack. Okay, as of the filming of this video, Square actually just announced another Final Fantasy X vinyl to commemorate the 25th anniversary, and oh my god, are we being treated. The gorgeous new artwork by Tetsuya Nomura, where Tidus is actually tan for once, and the actual records themselves that do look suspiciously close to my Elvan's medication. Add that to my basket. Obviously, it's not out yet, but I just know this is already the PS2 soundtrack, so let's just move on. So you might be led to believe that, oh, the PS2 soundtrack must be the definitive. That's wrong too. You see, Square over the last few months have started to upload the 10 soundtrack onto their Square Enix music channel on YouTube. That's right everybody, they're uploading the HD soundtrack and not the PS2 soundtrack. The tracks available on the above services are from the original soundtrack, and some of the tracks may differ from the video soundtrack. Thanks for the clarification guys. But like why? If you're still not the slightest bit interested in uploading HD soundtrack to streaming, why have you essentially thrown a curveball and have the HD soundtrack be the one you're uploading? The only reason that comes to mind is that these videos have existed prior to the YouTube channel. Remember this? The HD remaster soundtrack was released on Blu-ray, and when popped into a Blu-ray player, you could actually see visuals alongside the soundtrack, whether that be concept art or even shots from the game. I've been posting clips of it throughout this video. Square's essentially reusing these assets and uploading them to its music channel. Good. Yeah! It's too pretty and well made to be stuck on a music disc from 2013. However, it does add to the confusion of the quote-unquote definitive soundtrack. Because my script is old, they've actually uploaded the original soundtrack alongside the HD soundtrack now. So my new question is, can we finally get the HD soundtrack on streaming? Probably not. I'll let you in on a little secret. This one definite soundtrack that I keep going on and on about It doesn't really exist. I mean, I go back and forth between the two different versions of the soundtrack on a day-to-day basis. I mean, even the tracks I talked about today. But you just got to think about, why do they sound different? For example, with Prelude, it sounds different because it's a change of trend in club music. Battle, they just wanted to use live instruments because they were no longer limited by the PS2 sound font. I can't blame them. This video is kind of pointless in a sense because it doesn't matter which you listen to. But one thing is for certain, and that's both soundtracks have had the same amount of love and care put into them. Those textures, though, on the other hand...